So welcome everybody to this session on field reports. We have 3 papers today. We are going to hear first from FR Foley. Sean, do you have a PowerPoint that you're going to be sharing with us?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and share your screen and then I can announce the title of your paper.
Okay.
So we're going to hear about Naruo, an endangered Ngwi language spoken in Yunnan, China. And welcome, Sean. Very happy to have you here presenting. Go ahead.
Apologies for this moment.
Oh, and I just also wanted to add that Jonathan, I guess he's already told you that he'll be letting you know when you have 5 minutes left. So on. Is it Jonathan who's, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes and then 3 minutes, and then once time's up, we'll stop for questions.
All right, thanks. Shall I begin?
Yes, you may. Let's start.
All right, great, thanks. I'm very happy to be here, everyone, to discuss some of my research on the language Naruo, which was a previously undocumented Ngwi language spoken in Yunnan province in southwestern China. And so with this talk, I'll be presenting what would be some of the first real extensive data ever kind of presented on this language. Let's move forward. So I have a few kind of main goals with this talk. The first is to, as the language was previously kind of undocumented, I want to present a kind of overview of the language, namely like where it's spoken, a bit about the speakers and the language's vitality, and then also present a very kind of preliminary sketch of the language's phonology, particularly its phonemic inventory. And the last main thing I want to try to accomplish is trying to work towards classifying the role within the Ngwi. And so to start out, the first thing is just presenting a kind of overview of the language from my fieldwork on the role earlier this year. So first thing to point out is with Naruo's name. This name, so Naruo is not the name used by its speakers. So the speakers have the autonym Lolo, which is used by numerous groups of people in Yunnan and Sichuan provinces. And I've talked to other linguists about this, and it seems that this name Naruo might have come from some older surveys done of ethnic groups in this province. And there's, within the Southwestern Mandarin dialect, there's some variation between the na and la sounds, potentially also between r and l. And so from lolo, we could have potentially gotten nalo or naruo. So that's where we believe this name came from. So some of these early surveys mention that groups use this autonym, and it's kind of a cover term for various groups in this particular county in Yunnan province. But today, as far as I have seen, there are no groups that use this autonym. So Naruo its existence has been mentioned in some previous literature before, particularly in David Bradley's 2007 paper, where he mentions various languages of Southeast Asia. He notes that the language has maybe 15,000 speakers in Yunnan and Sichuan. As of now, there's no evidence that it's spoken in Sichuan, only in Yunnan. And it's likely that the numbers are much lower. So we know, as of now, that it's spoken in at least 3 villages in Yongsheng County, which is in northwestern Yunnan. And maybe in each village is close to 1,000 speakers or more in each village. So it's likely that it's closer to 4,000, 4,500 speakers of the language. The speakers of Naruo are officially classified as Yizu, which is one of the 55 nationalities recognized by the Chinese government, but they don't really closely identify with Yizu. They rather identify with this group known as Shuitian, which just literally means like irrigated or watered fields. But this term is not really specific to this group, but people in the area refer to them as Shui Tian. And it's from visiting the villages and talking to speakers, it seems quite obvious that the language is endangered. When you ask about kids speaking the language, they said no kids speak the language. Parents are opting to talk to their kids in Mandarin. Children can only really understand it if they're spoken to very, very slowly. So their competence in the language is quite limited. And so we look at kind of within Sino-Tibetan where we're looking at, so this is within the Lolo-Burmese branch. Loloish is then one of the sub-branches of Lolo-Burmese. I should note that this Loloish term has kind of become outdated, as some have noted that it has some pejorative meaning. So I've instead opted to use the term Ngwi, which is what most linguists are using today. And so when I say Ngwi in the future, it's actually it's Loloish. They're one and the same. And then here's a map of China and where we're looking at where this language is spoken. So the left is obviously a map of China.
Hey, Sean, I think you're still on the table of contents slide 2. I think you might be showing, if you have 2 screens, the opposite screen.
Okay, let me see here.
Or if you're doing share screen versus share window, there we go.
Can you see it in this now?
Yes, now it's moving, yeah.
Oh, so you didn't see this slide before?
No, but we were following, yeah.
Okay. So here's what I was just talking about before. In any case, I should mention that it's the 3 villages where we believe it's spoken, or 3 villages in Yongsheng County, which is in northwestern Yunnan province. So the 3 villages are Yongle, Yonghong, and Guangming. It's definitely likely or possible that it's spoken in other villages, but this data has not come out yet. So there's no evidence of it being spoken in other villages as of now. So I go forward to the map, back to the map of China that I was trying to discuss before. So left is a map of China. The kind of gray highlighted area is Yunnan province. And then this yellow area over here is the Lijiang kind of administrative region. And the pink highlighted area is Yongsheng County, where Naruo is spoken. And here's a government map of that county. And if we zoom in, so Naruo is spoken in the northwestern part of the county. And if we zoom in, we can see the 3 villages where we know it's spoken. And so I didn't get to visit all 3 villages. I visited Guangming and Yonghong here. And if you can read Chinese, you can see kind of where it's spoken in relation to potentially other groups. So this is Yizu area here, and then there's also Lisu and Nashi over here. And there's a map I made to show where Naruo is spoken in relation to some other Ngwi languages. A number of these that have only been documented in recent years. So it's quite close to what we would assume is Lipo, but which is also underdocumented. And these 4 Ngwi languages that have only really been documented in recent years. And then Nosu up here is going to be the closest northern Ngwi language, which will be relevant later. One thing I want to point out, actually, I'll go back to this map to show you. One thing became quite obvious to me when doing fieldwork in the area is that, as you might be able to see, this brown line represents a road, and there's basically not a lot of roads to Yonghong and Yongle down here. And so a piece of advice to future researchers who might want to work on this language is that if you want to work on the role, I suggest working in Guangming, because Yonghong and Yongle are very difficult to access. Just to show you, this is a view from Yonghong, and Yongle is basically going to be somewhere on this mountain on the opposite side. And to reach these areas, you have to access very, very narrow roads that can be very steep, basically that are on the side of the mountain. So it can be quite dangerous trying to access this area. Even one of the speakers who was in the car with me felt a little bit worried because the driver had never driven there. So I generally just recommend trying to work mainly in Guangming because it's off of a road. Actually, you don't have to go up the mountain to get to this village. So the few times that Naruo have been mentioned in previous literature, one I mentioned already was Bradley's 2007 paper, but really the first time was in Bradley's 2004 plenary talk at the ICSTL conference that year, in which he shed light on 14 endangered central Ngwi languages. And a lot of these are still undocumented, with the exception of a few. So now Naruo is one of these ones we now have some more data on 16 years later. One interesting thing, so in David Bradley's 2007 paper, he gave a kind of brief description of the language, but also ended up grouping Naruo into both central and northern Ngwi. He told me this is based on reports of it being similar to Talo, which is one of the languages also spoken in Yongsheng County, which is central Ngwi, and Nasu, which is spoken more to the east in Yunnan, which is a northern Ngwi language. And so one of the questions I want to work towards answering today is Naruo northern or central Ngwi? The last forthcoming paper is from Catherine Yang and another Chinese linguist that they have grouped Naruo into the Taloid cluster, which is a cluster of central Ngwi languages, a number of which are also spoken in Yongsheng County. This is based on a 50 word list taken from the 3 villages in Yongsheng. So just a quick overview of kind of how I approached doing field work on Naruo earlier this year. So this was actually carried out when I was living and working in Shanghai. I was employed at Shanghai International Studies University. And so that gave me kind of the ability to travel to this area and conduct this research. So I collected word lists of around 300 words from 3 speakers. These 300 words came from a 1,001 word list that linguists working on Ngwi languages have used. That was given to me by Catherine Yang. And so I visited 2 villages, as I mentioned, Yonghong and Guangming. 2 speakers were born in Yonghong and 1 from Guangming. The speakers were prompted in Chinese and asked to repeat the Naruo equivalent in isolation. Repeat this 3 times. I then use Pratt and minimal pairs for acoustic analysis, right, for determining the phonemes. And I tried to kind of approximately calculate what the tones are using Pratt and the Proto-Ngwi tone categories that were reconstructed by David Bradley. Then I looked at, I used comparative lexical data to compare my data to other nearby Ngwi languages and also Proto-Ngwi. And so the first result of that is a kind of preliminary sketch of the language's phonology. So the first thing that it has with its syllable structure, so it has optional consonant clusters. You can have also a consonant followed by a glide. And there is a single consonant that can occur in the syllable final position, which is this alveolar nasal. And it has very, very limited distribution, only occurring once in the data that I gathered. And overall, language has quite similar phonemic inventory to other Ngwi languages. One thing I'll point out, has a quite large inventory of vowels. And early data suggests there's at least 4 tones. Again, since I collected the words in isolation, it's a bit difficult to assess the tones. And so I think once we get more phonetic data, we can better assess the tonal inventory of the language. There are at least 4 tones: a high level tone, a mid-level tone, a falling tone, and a rising tone. But again, this needs, we need more data to better assess this. So the first thing, here's a few examples of language's syllable canon, so possible syllable structures. This last one, with the syllable final consonant, this is the only case of this in the data. this word for charcoal. And again, with the consonant followed by glide, this also has quite limited distribution. It's the glide occurs after nasal stops. So here is the inventory of initials that I've found so far with the data that I have. A couple of things point out with this, that language distinguishes between this full sets of alveolar, retroflex, and alveopalatal fricatives and affricates. And if we look comparing the retroflex and alveopalatal series, that language tends to favor the retroflex series, and it's going to be in complementary distribution with the alveopalatal series. And then with that, as I point out here, they really only distinguish before this low central vowel. Couple interesting things, it has these consonant clusters that I have not seen in any other Ngwi languages. It has basically this voiced and voiceless version of this bilabial stop followed by a fricative, where it's like bzz and ps before the.
About 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, before the high front rounded vowel, then also bv before e, which I have not seen in other nearby languages. A couple other things common to nearby languages. F has very restricted distribution, only occurring a few times in the data. I think only twice in the data that I have. We have this kind of approximate wa can be an allophone of v before some vowels like u. And one thing I found a bit interesting is, in addition to there being widespread aspiration, there's also it's also common for there to be this labialization of different stops and affricates. And so where a word like this word for sweet might be usually like ch, in Naruo they pronounce it as ch, whereas this kind of contact between the lips causing this labialization. Here's just some initial examples of the initial consonants here. Again, a number of these have quite limited distribution. I think with more data can better test these. For example, the palatal nasal only occurs a couple times in the data. It's similar with a few others. Moving on to the vowels, the rhymes. One thing, it has a vowel inventory similar to a lot of Ngwi languages, except for the back vowels. There's kind of this extra back vowel in there, creating 5 back vowels, which is a bit uncommon for these languages. The other thing that is a bit unique is where a number of Ngwi languages have this kind of low central vowel, a. Naruo often instead has this mid central vowel, and this is quite unique to Naruo. In addition to these, there's also the kind of syllabic fricatives, which occur right after the homoorganic fricatives and affricates in language. There's a few of these diphthongs, which can occur after stops, nasals, and fricatives. So these 4 diphthongs on the 4 that I found in the language. Other things, there is widespread retraction of both front and back vowels, the thing I found across nearby languages. And then one last kind of important thing to point out is that I found when comparing a male and female speaker, that the male speaker doesn't kind of pronounce this diphthong ye. He just pronounces this vowel kind of without this transition.
About 2 more minutes.
Okay. And I think it could be interesting to see if this is more widespread among speakers, that there's this gender variation between the pronunciation of this monophthong and this diphthong. And then here's a few examples of the rhymes in the words that I have so far. The last thing, hopefully I don't run over time, is just to, I wanted to work towards trying to classify Naruo. As I mentioned earlier, it had been grouped into both northern and central Ngwi. Again, this is where we are, the Ngwi branch of Lower Mies. Is it northern or central Ngwi? Linguists have proposed various criteria for either central or northern Ngwi status. A lot of these tend to deal with the tones and the how the tones have changed compared to the reconstructed Proto-Ngwi tones. For Central Ngwi, one of the most common criteria is the splitting of Central Proto-Ngwi tones 1 and 2. But as I mentioned, I don't have really firm data for Naruo's tonal system, and so the main way I want to try to classify languages through lexical innovations. I'll look at a couple proposed. This second point and this first point are basically the same. And so if we go to a chart where I have these for Naruo and comparing them to nearby central Ngwi languages and also northern Ngwi languages, we see some apparent cases where Naruo shares certain lexical innovations with some other central Ngwi languages that the northern Ngwi languages do not share. So the first three are from Pelkey and David Bradley. So the first two are with dog, which Pelkey's called agentive nominalizer prefixed innovations, where this ah prefix kind of denotes that it's kind of an agentive feature where to is kind of the verb, and so fire ends up meaning literally burner. So this to verb means burn, and ah gives it this agentive feature. And the same with dog, where nu means snatch, and so the word for dog becomes literally snatcher. So Naruo shares this lexical innovation for fire, but does not have this innovation for dog. Tile is another one David Bradley brought up, but it's also shared by Nasu, it seems. So it's not a good indicator of Central Ngwi status. These last two come from Lama's 2011 paper in his Lisoid cluster. And so these are a couple of lexical innovations that were meant to kind of group a group of languages that are similar to Lisu, one of the better attested Central Ngwi languages. And so to make it short, Naruo does share these two innovations. So there's a total of 3 innovations in working for Naruo's favor that it's a Central Ngwi language. And even just looking at data, you can see that it looks very, very similar to Talu, Tagu, and Lisu. And so just from this, I think I can grant Naruo very kind of preliminary membership into Central Ngwi. And I think with further data, it will confirm this. And just last things, so the documentation of the language is urgent as it's highly endangered. A lot more phonetic documentation is needed, right, particularly to assess the language's phonology, like its tonal system. And right, this language is right connected to the kind of larger history of the peoples of northwestern Yunnan, right? Has connections to the Taloi cluster and also Central Ngwi. Sorry, I went over time a little bit, but that's all I have. I'm happy to take questions.
Unfortunately, the clapping is not very loud in this virtual world, but see Tricia there is clapping, and so thank you very much for that presentation. And well, just amazing to be hearing about field work in distant places right now. And you said something about having gone earlier this year. Was it really earlier this year then, in January or February before?
It was in January, basically almost a week before COVID became very widespread in China.
And how long have you been working on to gather this much information?
I was in the area for about a week.
For about a week, okay.
Because as I went there, I wasn't sure if I could actually collect the data. I was trying to organize working towards doing a field trip or field work there, but I ended up meeting speakers who were very supportive of trying to get field work or get data on their language.
Okay. Well, those questions were just by way of background. Did anybody else have any substantive questions? So,
Yeah, I did have one.
yeah.
My
lead mic.
question is, and I know you haven't analyzed the tones really well yet, but on that first slide where you were listing the tones, when you stated the falling tone, you had two different, I guess, allotones of it. You had the 2-1 as well as the 5-2. What made you class those as the same rather than two separate tones?
I think because in the data, there's only a few cases of a 5-2, and this was actually from data that I didn't collect. It was from the 50 word list that was collected by other linguists, given to me by Catherine Yang. So the data I have, I've only tested the 2-1 falling tone. So that's just from other data. So there's at least one falling tone, but whether or not these are distinguished, I've yet to determine.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Was that other data also a word list, or was it a text? Or
It was a 50 word list.
There's a question from Norihiko. Would you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your very much good words. And so I wondering, are there any creaky vowels in this language? Creaky vowels. So I see that there is some words with the creaky vowels in your slides, I think.
I have some that are nasalized, like maybe this one for home, like hika.
Yeah, actually, but so the other slides show some words with some creaky sounds in your word list, I think. So what?
Potentially be here. Do you mean?
Oh yeah, it's a new. Also, is it the new? The word for smell.
Yes.
Do you think it is distinctive?
I don't. Oh, the word for smell. Okay.
Could you repeat that?
The word for smell.
Yeah.
Is it? Does it mean the word for the word with a creaky vowel?
I'm not sure if it's creaky. I haven't had that.
Actually, okay, thank you. So the word for early. The word for early. So
yeah. I have this indicated as retraction. This
okay.
This
Good.
marker. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're produced with they pull the tongue kind of back into the pharynx, and so kind of like words like nah, it's like no.
Thank you.
I was similarly curious about the syllabic fricatives.
Mm-hmm. Can
you give us an example of a word and what that would sound like?
So this is so these two here. This is something actually I want to look into a bit more. There's kind of different ways of classifying these, like as whether or not they're syllabic fricatives or apical vowels. And this is actually something I want to look at in a bit more. So this is similar to like in like Chinese words, for example, where they claim they have this. This is basically this first one here only occurs before alveopalatal or alveolar fricatives and affricates, whereas the other one recurs after retroflex fricatives and affricates. So it's like s and sh. Yeah.
Cool.
Should I stop sharing my screen?
Maybe if people have any other questions or comments.
I was just going to ask a little bit more about kind of the other languages in the area. So I know that you mentioned that the kids are speaking primarily Mandarin. Are there any other kind of languages that they're speaking as well, or is it pretty much just exclusively Mandarin?
So like in this area, so this area is quite linguistically diverse, I would say. And so where, I mean, let's see if I go back. So this area, so this is where Naruo is spoken, and obviously in a lot of these villages, they're going to speak the southwestern dialect of Mandarin. But in addition to that, there's going to be these other minority languages that are going to be quite distinct, like Hello and Lavu. And whereas, for example, a lot of these are essential, or we believe are essential Ngwi languages, but there's variation in the degrees of mutual intelligibility between these languages. But generally, they all speak Southwest Mandarin, but also have their own language as well.
It does seem that, it's going to take a little bit deeper field work for you to get more than the set of, lexical innovations that you were going to look at. That's great. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you could find something more in addition to lexical, maybe going into something morphological, so that you can really be stronger about that. So it'd be interesting to see if you're able to get more test cases that make you feel stronger about the class.
Yeah, I hope to.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Thank you for that example. And yes,